guys, it's Aoife from Words of Clover and I'm here to do the second part of my October wrap-up. I will leave the first part of my October wrap-up linked up above if you guys haven't watched that yet. So I have 6 books to talk about in this wrap-up. One of those was a novella and one of those was an audiobook, and I'll get straight on into that now. The first book I read since the last wrap-up I did was The Sanatorium by Sarah Pearse. This is a mystery slash thriller book that is set in like the Swiss Alps. This is a book I got from NetGalley. I actually don't think it's due to be published until 2021, so I read it quite a bit early. So in this book we are following a police detective called Ellen who is kind of off duty. She's kind of has taken a bit of a career break. There's a lot of things going on in her life. She is travelling to this hotel with her boyfriend to celebrate her brother's engagement. She hasn't seen her brother in a few years, and her brother is also linked to a traumatic event in her past that she hasn't really been able to get over, and she still thinks a lot of it. So she has this like traumatic event. She herself has like a lot of kind of personal issues going on as well. So there's just like a lot going on with her. But when they get there, this storm is approaching and they end up getting like kind of stuck in the hotel during this snowstorm. Then this body shows up and Ellen kind of suddenly realizes that they may be in the midst of a serial killer. But there's only so many people that are around because obviously they are in a snowstorm in this hotel. And the hotel itself has this like really creepy kind of history because it used to be a sanatorium, and there's a lot of like weird things linked to this hotel, and just the atmosphere of the hotel itself is a little bit ominous. So Ellen is kind of the only person like in the hotel that is able to kind of look into these murders and try and figure out what is happening, because everyone else is just a normal civilian. The police can't get there, so it's kind of almost like a race against time to figure out who the killer is and who the next victims could be. So this book was fine for me. There wasn't anything absolutely amazing about it. I did enjoy reading it. I felt like it was a little bit long. The main story, like the first body, doesn't really show up until about 50% through the book, and that's when it kind of the story really ramps up. The first like 50% is really kind of a lot of build up to Ellen, who she is, her kind of history with her brother, things that went on in her childhood, and just like the different things that she is trying to deal with. So there's a lot of just kind of build up. It seemed to take a while and kind of slow this first part of the story down a lot. I do really like stories that are set in this kind of like setting where, you know, everyone is stuck in this one place and it's kind of like a one-by-one situation where everyone is in danger but you don't know who the person perpetrating the crimes is. The atmosphere of the book was quite good because obviously there is this snowstorm. It does kind of feel claustrophobic at times. You can kind of feel like that kind of cold, quiet settling on the book that like that snow brings. And then there's also the added kind of feeling in the air of the fact that this hotel used to be a sanatorium, and like the history that Ellen starts uncovering about the events in the sanatorium and how what could have happened to people in the sanatorium is linked to what is happening now and why people are being killed. Some of the like murder in this book, like, and like the way bodies are found and what is being done to them, is a little bit on the gruesome side. It's not terrible, but there was one in particular that was particularly gruesome near the end. One of the things I didn't like with this book is that throughout the entire book it kind of feels like Ellen is like, she's literally going on like no sleep and no food and just like a little bit of coffee like the whole time this book is going on. And it just kind of irritated me that she was never eating, yet she was kind of going all the time, and it just kind of felt like she was on the verge of collapse and exhaustion the entire time in this book. And it just like gave me anxiety as a reader because I just wanted her to like eat something. I really needed her to like eat a proper burger or something because I was genuinely worried about her like health and her well-being, because she's just not someone who comes across as a strong character. She's someone who actually comes across quite weak. She did have a little bit of transformation when she went into like detective mode, but other than that, like there were times where like you kind of felt like she was really only surviving on air, and you know, at any moment she could just collapse. She felt like a very brittle character. So overall I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. As I said, it didn't wow me. It was still an interesting read. It was a fun read. I'm not sure how memorable it will be in a few months' time when I look back at this book. It was okay as a thriller, so I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was a book I received from Joe Fletcher Books in exchange for an honest review, and that was Love Bites by Herman. I talked about this a little bit in my cozy reading weekend vlog, and this is basically a really fun urban fantasy set in the 90s where we are following these two characters. One is human and one is a vampire. So we are following Angela, who a year previously was turned into a vampire by her ex-girlfriend, and then we are following Chloe, who is a human who is suffering from a lot of different things herself. She's suffering from anxiety and depression, and when she meets Angela, things kind of change for her and they kind of start this romantic relationship. But obviously Angela is dealing with a lot being a vampire, trying to deal with like what being a vampire entails. She can't go out in the daytime. She obviously craves blood, and yeah, so there's like a lot of things that get in the way of relationships, and she's kind of dealing with what she should tell Chloe. Should she tell Chloe the truth? So this was just a fun urban fantasy read, to be honest. Like there wasn't like a whole lot going on with it, but it was just fun playing with like the kind of supernatural creatures trope. There's obviously vampires in this, but there's also kind of werewolves and witches and angels and things. How they appear in the book is really fun, and it's kind of like an are they, aren't they? You don't really know until it's like revealed. I did really like the vampire tropes that this played with, and I didn't really have anything bad to say about it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, and I definitely will pick up more of what Herman wrote, because I think the way he played on the urban fantasy genre in this book was just really fun. And after that, I read what is possibly my favourite book of the year so far, and as well I think it might be one of my favourite books of all time, and that is A Ghost in the Throat by Ghríofa. This is a book that is kind of a part essay, part memoir, part look at this Irish noblewoman's white life from history, and the author Doireann's obsession with this woman and how she kind of ended up becoming a huge part of her life for a very long time as she studied this woman's life and like what she was like and her history. I find it really hard to try and explain this book because there was just something about it that just really hit deep for me, that I just really loved it. So as I said, it's part kind of memoir, and it's really Ghríofa's talking about how she came to find out about this woman called Evelyn Dove, who wrote this kind of really famous for Art O'Leary, who was this this Irish figure in history, and how she became obsessed with this like Evelyn, who was Art's wife and who wrote this Kina for him. Throughout this book, Doireann is also, she's kind of in and out of motherhood. There's a lot of the time in this book that she's pregnant, she has young children, and she talks about kind of pregnancy and motherhood and her connection to her body and her connection to this other mother in history that she is studying. And there are just so many amazing lines about what it is to be a woman, what it is to be a mother, her connection with her body, how her body looks after itself and looks after her children, and not even her children but like other children, because she donates her breast milk at different parts of this book as well, which is just really interesting to read about, because I didn't know that was something that you could do. Really personal at times as well, and just this look into Doireann's life and then her connection to this historical figure, and as well this kind of look at how women are portrayed in history but how they are remembered in history, and how Evelyn, she wrote this like amazing Kina for Art O'Leary, who was her husband, but then how we know very little about her actual life and like what actually happened to her, and how women are so many times they're raised by men in history, and how their lives sometimes aren't seen as important enough to remember, how their letters and like things in their life are destroyed or discarded in favour of things that belong to the men in their life. And just the way how Doireann explores that was just absolutely amazing. This book is just phenomenal, and I just can't put into words how great it is, because I think it's a real personal thing as well. I think some people would really connect with this book and other people won't at all, but I just think it's a really special book, and I think this is a book that I can revisit over and over and get over and over again at different parts of my life, at different ages and in different stages of my life, whether like as a wife or through motherhood, or like through someone who maybe might never have children, or for someone who is just loves lore and loves history and loves like finding things out about people in history, particularly women in history, and a connection with women in history as well. Like there's just so many different things that you can connect with in this book, and I think as I change, as I get older, as I go through different stages in my life and I revisit this book, it will have a different meaning to me every single time. And there are very few books I think that you can find that are like that, and I think this is one of those ones, and I think this just deserves all the hype that it's been getting. And this was like a 5 out of 5 stars, as I said, one of my favourite books of the year, probably one of my favourite books of all time. And yeah, I actually already cannot wait to reread this because it was just great. And like this is like not really anything to do with the book, but just this book in general was just a really nice book to read. Whatever way it's made, it's kind of like a floppy paperback, but like it's like kind of sturdy as well, like sturdy cardboard. And yeah, I just really like as a book to read, it was just like a really nice book to handle and to read, which just made the reading experience all the better. The next book I read was a novella called The Necromancer's Bride by Brianna Hale, and this is a book I don't really want to talk that much about because it was really fucking weird. But this is a book I found out through a vlog that Riley over at Riley Marie did, and the way she talked about this book, it was just so weird and so like almost disgusting and perverse. I was kind of so intrigued that I went onto Amazon. It was on like 99p, so I ended up buying it just to read it because I just wanted to find out like what it was really, and I kind of question myself now because it was just really strange. This is basically just about like, it's kind of like a fantasy slash horror erotic novella about this woman who is saved by this necromancer when she's young. She was really sick and she was saved by this necromancer, and he left this mark on her hand. So when she grows up, she has this mark on her hand, and everyone kind of avoids her and they don't really like her. And then when children in her village start getting sick again, she decides to visit this necromancer again to try and get him to save these children the way he saved her all those years ago. But when she gets there, she ends up having this kind of connection with the necromancer. He makes her stay in his like castle for like a month or something before he actually goes and saves the children, which didn't really make that much sense, to be honest. And yeah, things start happening between them. There are just some like really weird parts of this book, and the only way I can describe it is it's kind of like erotic fairy tale about an erectile dysfunction. And there are just some really strange passages in this book that I just question myself for reading, but I only have myself to blame because Riley said this was a really weird book. She didn't really like it, but I still went and picked it up and read it because I just needed to know. So I gave it like a 3 out of 5 stars because it wasn't like terrible, and there were parts of it that I did like enjoy, but I enjoyed it probably because it was so weird. But yeah, I don't really have anything else to say about it. And then I finished my audiobook, which was Girl, Woman, Other by Bernadine Evaristo, which was absolutely fabulous. I loved this book, and it was particularly amazing on audiobook as well, and the narrator was really, really good. I will leave her name down below. So this is a book that is basically about a bunch of different women, all women of colour and all kind of black and British. It's kind of exploring their kind of lives, their identities. So you have women who are like straight, who are bi, who are gay, people who are non-binary, and then like people with all these different types of history and different types of childhoods, and they really have to work to make something of themselves. And it was just so amazing. I just loved to be honest, I loved every single character in this. There were a few that stood out among the others, but for kind of like slices of life almost, I just thought it was so great the way every single character was so strong and her own individual voice was so strong. I just loved every single one of them. There were some that were like really heartbreaking. Is trigger warnings for, I should say, sexual assault in this, as well as domestic abuse. I did really like the fact that there was domestic abuse shown in this book because it was in a same-sex relationship, and I think it's really important to show that those kind of abusive relationships can happen in same-sex relationships as well as like a male and female relationship, and indeed it can happen to men perpetrated by women as well. But I just absolutely love this book. I give it a 5 out of 5 stars, and yeah, I'm just so glad I finally read it, and I can see why everyone loves it. And then the last book I finished in October was Dracula, because I was a basic bitch and I decided that I wanted to reread Dracula in October. And to be honest, I don't think I enjoy this as much on a reread, but I think that has mostly to do with the fact that over the past year my reading concentration has changed a lot, and I feel like I was just having a hard time really connecting with this book in the same way as I have previously when I did read it, because the first time I read this book I absolutely loved it, and I think I might have given it a 5 out of 5 stars, I think, or at least a 4 out of 5 stars, where this time around it might have been more of like a 3 out of 5 stars. But I think that is just to do with my own concentration rather than the story itself. I still think the story is really, really good, and I actually always forget that this is a novel all told through letters and diary entries, an epistolary novel I think it's called, but yeah, I always forget that. That's always just fun to remember, and I do really, really love the female characters in this. Mina Harker in particular, I just think she is such a great character, and I do think at times like there is a little bit misogyny about how the men treat her, and like she's super precious and she can't really be involved in things, but at the same time, if she had been involved from the start, like she is actually a very strong, outspoken, educated, clever woman, and yeah, I just really love her character in this. So as I said, probably this time around I might give it like a 3 out of 5 stars, but it still kind of stays as like a very high rated book for me because the first time I read it I absolutely loved it. I just think, as I said, because my reading concentration and the way I've read has changed over like during COVID and stuff, I just couldn't dedicate as much time as I wanted to each time I read this book, so it felt like it dragged for me a little bit, but I think that was more to do with me than the book itself. So that is everything I have read in October. I hope you guys had a lovely October and a really spooky Halloween. Now the countdown for Christmas is on, so that should be great. So please leave any thoughts down below. What was your favourite book that you read in October? Have you read any of these books? Would you recommend me any books to read before the end of the year? Thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye!